Beowulf, chapter 32. But the thief had not come to steal. He stole and roused the dragon, not from desire, but need. He was someone's slave, had been beaten by his masters, had run from all men's sight, but with no place to hide. Then he found the hidden path and used it, and once inside, seeing the sleeping beast, staring as it yawned and stretched, not wanting to wake it, terror-struck, he turned and ran for his life, taking the jeweled cup. That tower was heaped high with hidden treasure, stored there years before by the last survivor of a noble race, ancient riches left in the darkness as the end of a dynasty came. Death had taken them, one by one, and the warrior who watched over all that remained mourned their fate, expecting, soon, the same for himself, knowing the gold and jewels he had guarded so long could not bring him pleasure much longer. He brought the precious cups, the armor and the ancient swords, but a stone tower built near the sea, below a cliff, a sealed fortress with no windows, no doors, waves in front of it, rocks behind. Then he spoke. "Take these treasures, earth, now that no one living can enjoy them. They were yours in the beginning. Allow them to return. War and terror have swept away my people, shut their eyes to delight and to living, closed the door to all gladness. No one is left to lift these swords, polish these jeweled cups. No one leads, no one follows. These hammered helmets, worked with gold, will tarnish and crack. The hands that should clean and polish them are still forever. And these mail shirts, worn in battle once, while swords crashed and blades bit into shields and men, will rust away like the warriors who owned them. None of these treasures will travel to distant lands, following their lords. The harp's bright song, the hawk crossing through the hall on its swift wings, the stallion tramping in the courtyard, all gone, creatures of every kind, and their masters, hurled to the gravel." And so he spoke, sadly, of those long dead, and lived from day to day, joyless, until, at last, death touched his heart and took him too. And a stalker in the night, a flaming dragon, found the treasure unguarded. He whom men fear came flying through the darkness, wrapped in fire, seeking caves and stone-split ruins, but finding gold. Then it stayed, buried itself with heathen silver and jewels it could neither use nor ever abandon. So mankind's enemy, the mighty beast, slept in those stone walls for hundreds of years. A runaway slave roused it, stole a jeweled cup and bought his master's forgiveness, begged for mercy, and was pardoned when his delighted lord took the present he bore, turned it in his hands, and stared at the ancient carvings. The cup brought peace to a slave, pleased his master, but stirred a dragon's anger. It turned, hunting the thief's tracks, and found them, saw where its visitor had come and gone. He'd survived, had come close enough to touch its scaly head, and yet lived, as it lifted its cavernous jaws, through the grace of Almighty God, and a pair of quiet, quick-moving feet. The dragon followed his steps, anxious to find a man who had robbed it of silver in sleep. It circled around and around the tower, determined to catch him, but could not. He had run too fast. The wilderness was empty. The beast went back to its treasure, planning a bloody revenge, and found what was missing, saw what thieving hands had stolen. Then it crouched on the stones, counting off the hours till the Almighty's candle went out, and evening came, and wild with anger it could fly burning across the land, killing and destroying with its breath. Then the sun was gone, and its heart was glad. Glowing with rage it left the tower, impatient to repay its enemies. The people suffered, everyone lived in terror, but when Beowulf had learned of their trouble his fate was worse, and came quickly. Chapter 33. Vomiting fire and smoke, the dragon burned down their homes. They watched in horror as the flames rose up. The angry monster meant to leave nothing alive, and the signs of its anger flickered and glowed in the darkness. Visible for miles, tokens of its hate and its cruelty, spread like a warning to the Geats who had broken its rest. Then it hurried back to its tower, to its hidden treasure, before dawn could come. It had wrapped its flames around the Geats. Now it trusted in stone walls and its strength to protect it. But they would not. Then they came to Beowulf, their king, and announced that his hall, his throne, The best of his buildings had melted away in the dragon's burning breath. Their words brought misery. Beowulf's sorrow beat at his heart. He accused himself of breaking God's law, of bringing the Almighty's anger down on his people. Reproach pounded in his breast, gloomy and dark. And the world seemed a different place. But the hall was gone. The dragon's molten breath had licked across it, burned it to ashes. Near the shore it had guarded. The Geats deserved revenge. Beowulf, their leader and lord, began to plan it. Ordered a battle shield shaped of iron, knowing that wood would be useless, that no linden shield could protect him, in the flaming heat of the beast's breath. That noble prince would end his days on earth soon, would leave this brief life, but would take the dragon with him, tear it from the heaped-up treasure it had guarded so long, and he'd go to it alone, scorning to lead soldiers against such an enemy. He saw nothing to fear, thought nothing of the beast's claws or wings or flaming jaws. He had fought before, against worse odds, had survived, been victorious, in harsher battles. Beginning in Heorot, Hrothgar's unlucky hall, he'd killed Grendel and his mother, swept that murdering tribe away. And he'd fought in Higlac's war with the Frisians, fought at his lord's side till a sword reached out and drank Higlac's blood, till a blade swung in the rush of battle killed the Geats' great king. Then Beowulf escaped, broke through Frisian shields and swam to freedom, saving 30 sets of armor from the scavenging Franks, river people who robbed the dead as they floated by. Beowulf offered them only his sword, ended so many jackal lives that the few who skulked silently home, glad to leave him. So Beowulf swam sadly back to Geatland, almost the only survivor of the foolish war. Higlac's widow brought him the crown, offered him the kingdom, not trusting Herdred, her son, and Higlac's, to beat off foreign invaders. But Beowulf refused to rule when his lord's own son was alive, and the leaderless Geats could choose a rightful king. He gave Herdred all his support, offering an open heart where Higlac's young son could see wisdom he still lacked himself. Warmth and good were that Beowulf brought his new king. But Swedish exiles came, seeking protection. They were rebels against Onela, Healfdene's son-in-law and the best ring-giver his people had ever known. And Onela came too, a mighty king, marched on Geatland with a huge army. Herdred had given his word, and now he gave his life, shielding the Swedish strangers. Onela wanted nothing more. When Herdred had fallen, that famous warrior went back to Sweden. Let Beowulf rule. Chapter 34. But Beowulf remembered how his king had been killed. As soon as he could, he lent the last of the Swedish rebels soldiers and gold, helped him to a bitter battle across the wide sea, where victory and revenge and the Swedish throne were won, and Onela was slain. So Egido's son survived, no matter what dangers he met, what battles he fought, brave and forever triumphant, till the day fate sent him to the dragon and sent him death. A dozen warriors walked with their angry king, when he was brought to the beast. Beowulf knew, by then, what had woken the monster and enraged it. The cup had come to him, travelled from dragon to slave to master to king, and the slave was their guide, had begun the Geats' affliction, and now, afraid of both beast and men, was forced to lead them to the monster's hidden home. He showed them the huge stones, set deep in the ground, with the sea beating on the rocks close by. Beowulf stared, listened to stories of the gold and riches heaped inside. Hidden but wakeful now, the dragon waited, ready to greet him. Gold and hammered armor have been buried in pleasanter places. The battle-brave king rested on the shore, while his soldiers wished him well, urged him on. But Beowulf's heart was heavy. His soul sensed how close fate had come, felt something, not fear, but knowledge of an old age. His armor was strong, but his arm hung like his heart. Body and soul might part here, his blood might be spilled, his spirit torn from his flesh. Then he spoke. My early days were full of war, and I survived it all. I could remember everything. I was 7 years old when Hrethel opened his home and his heart for me, when my king and lord took me from my father and kept me, taught me, gave me gold and pleasure, glad that I sat at his knee. And he never loved me less than any of his sons, Herbald, the oldest of all, or Hathsin, or Higlak, my lord. Herbald died a horrible death, killed while hunting. Hathsin, his brother, stretched his horn-tipped bow, sent an arrow flying, but missed his mark and hit Herbald instead. Found him with a bloody point and pierced him through. The crime was great, the guilt was plain, but nothing could be done. No vengeance, no death to repay that death, no punishment, nothing. So with the greybeard whose son sins against the king and is hanged, he stands watching his child swing on the gallows, lamenting, helpless, while his flesh and blood hangs for the raven to pluck. He can raise his voice in sorrow, but revenge is impossible. And every morning he remembers how his son died, and despairs. No son to come matters, no future heir, to a father forced to live through such misery. The place where his son once dwelled, before death compelled him to journey away, is a windy wasteland, empty, cheerless. The childless father shudders, seeing it. So riders and ridden sleep in the ground. Pleasure is gone, the harp is silent, and hope is forgotten. Chapter 35. And then, crying his sorrow, he crawls to his bed. The world and his home hurt him with their emptiness. And so it seemed to Hrethel, where Herbald was dead, and his heart swelled with grief. The murderer lived. He felt no love for him now, but nothing could help. Word nor hand, no sharp honed blade. War nor hate. Battle or blood, or law. The pain could find no relief. He could only live with it, or leave grief and life together. When he'd gone to his grave, Halfsin and Wiglaf, his sons, inherited everything. And then there was war between Geats and Swedes. Bitter battles carried across the broad sea, when the mighty Hrethel slept, and Ongetho's sons thought Sweden could safely attack. So no use to pretending friendship, but raided and burned, and near old Rensburg slaughtered Geats with their thieving swords. My people repaid them, death for death, battle for battle, though one of the brothers bought that revenge with his life. Halfsin, king of the Geats, killed by a Swedish sword. But when dawn came, the slayer was slain, and Wiglaf's soldiers avenged everything with the edge of their blades. Afore caught the Swedish king, cracked his helmet, split his skull, dropped him, pale and bleeding, to the ground, then put him to death with a swift stroke, shouting his joy. The gifts that Wiglaf gave me and the land I earned with my sword. As fate allowed, he never needed Danes or Goths or Swedes, soldiers and allies bought with gold, bribed to his side. My sword was better, and always his. In every battle my place was in front, alone, and so it shall be forever, as long as this sword lasts, serves me in the future as it has served me before. So I killed Dagriff, the Frank, who brought death to Wiglaf, and who looted his corpse. Hig's necklace, Wealhtheow's treasure, never came to Dagriff's king. The thief fell in battle, but not on my blade. He was brave and strong, but I swept him in my arms, ground him against me till his bones broke, till his blood burst out. And now I shall fight for this treasure, fight with both hand and sword. And Beowulf uttered his final boast. I've never known fear. As a youth I fought in endless battles. I am old now, but I will fight again, seek fame still, if the dragon hiding in his tower dares to face me. Then he said farewell to his followers, each in turn, for the last time. I'd use no sword, no weapon, if this beast could be killed without it, crushed to death like Grendel, gripped in my hands and torn limb from limb. But his breath will be burning hot, poison will pour from his tongue. I feel no shame, with shield and sword and armor against this monster. When he comes to me, I mean to stand, not run from his shooting flames. Stand till fate decides which of us wins. My heart is firm, my hands calm. I need no hot words. Wait for me close by, my friends. We shall see soon who will survive this bloody battle. Stand when the fighting is done. No one else could do what I mean to here. No man but me could hope to defeat this monster. No one could try. And this dragon's treasure, his gold and everything hidden in that tower, will be mine, or war will sweep me to a bitter death. Then Beowulf rose, still brave, still strong, and with his shield at his side, and a mail shirt on his breast, strode calmly, confidently, toward the tower under the rocky cliffs. No coward could have walked there. And then he who'd endured dozens of desperate battles, who'd stood boldly while swords and shields clashed, the best of kings, saw huge stone arches and felt the heat of the dragon's breath, flooding down through the hidden entrance, too hot for anyone to stand, a streaming current of fire, and smoke that blocked all passage. And the Geats' lord and leader, angry, lowered his sword and roared out a battle cry, a call so loud and clear that it reached through the hoary rock, hung in the dragon's ear. The beast rose, angry, knowing a man had come, and then nothing but war could have followed. Its breath came first, a streaming cloud pouring from the stone. Then the earth itself shook. Beowulf swung his shield into place, held it in front of him, facing the entrance. The dragon coiled and uncoiled, its heart urging it into battle. Beowulf's ancient sword was waiting, unsheathed, his sharp and gleaming blade. The beast came closer. Both of them were ready, each set on slaughter. The Geats' great prince stood firm, unmoving, prepared behind his high shield, waiting in his shining armor. The monster came quickly toward him, pouring out fire and smoke, hurrying to its fate. Flames beat at the iron shield, and for a time it held, protected Beowulf as he'd planned. Then it began to melt, and for the first time in his life that famous prince fought with fate against him, with glory denied him. He knew it, but he raised his sword and struck at the dragon's scaly hide. The ancient blade broke, bit into the monster's skin, drew blood, but cracked and failed him before it went deep enough, helped him less than he needed. The dragon leaped with pain, thrashed and beat at him, spouting murderous flames, spreading them everywhere. And the Geats' ring-giver did not boast of glorious victories in other wars. His weapon had failed him, deserted him. Now, when he needed it most, that excellent sword. Ecgtheow's famous son stared at death, unwilling to leave this world, to exchange it for a dwelling in some distant place, a journey into darkness that all men must make, as death ends their few brief hours on earth. Quickly the dragon came at him, encouraged as Beowulf fell back. Its breath flared, and he suffered, wrapped around in swirling flames, a king, before, but now a beaten warrior. None of his comrades came to him, helped him, his brave and noble followers. They ran for their lives, fled deep in a wood, and only one of them remained, stood there, miserable, remembering, as a good man must, what kinship should mean. Chapter 36. His name was Wiglaf. He was Wexton's son, and a good soldier. His family had been Swedish once. Watching Beowulf, he could see how this king was suffering, burning. Remembering everything his lord and cousin had given him, armor and gold and the great estates Wexton's family enjoyed, Wiglaf's mind was made up. He raised his yellow shield and drew his sword, an ancient weapon that had once belonged to Onella's nephew, and that Wexton had won, killing the prince when he fled from Sweden, sought safety with Herdred, and found death. And Wiglaf's father had carried the dead man's armor and his sword to Onella, and the king had said nothing, only given him armor and sword and all, everything his rebel nephew had owned and lost when he left this life. And Wexton had kept those shining gifts, held them for years, waiting for his son to use them, wear them as honorably and well as once his father had done. Then Wexton died, and Wiglaf was his heir, inherited treasures and weapons and land. He'd never worn that armor, fought with that sword, until Beowulf called him to his side, led him into war. But his soul did not melt. His sword was strong. The dragon discovered his courage and his weapon, when the rush of battle brought them together. And Wiglaf, his heart heavy, uttered the kind of words his comrades deserved. I remember how we sat in the mead hall, drinking and boasting of how brave we'd been when Beowulf needed us. He who gave us these swords and armor, all of us swore to repay him. When the time came, kindness for kindness, with our lives if he needed them. He allowed us to join him, chose us from all his great army, thinking our boasting words had some weight, believing our promises, trusting our swords. He took us for soldiers, for men. He meant to kill this monster himself, our mighty king, fight this battle alone and unaided, as in the days when his strength and daring dazzled men's eyes. But those days are over and gone, and now our Lord must lean on younger arms, and we must go to him, while angry flames burn at his flesh, help our glorious king. By Almighty God, I'd rather burn myself than see flames swirling around my Lord. And who are we to carry home our shields before we've slain his enemy and ours, to run back to our homes with Beowulf so hard-pressed here? I swear that nothing he ever did deserved an end like this, dying miserably and alone, butchered by this savage beast. We swore that these swords and armor were each for us all. Then he ran to his king, crying encouragement as he dove through the dragon's deadly fumes. "Beloved Beowulf, remember how you boasted once that nothing in the world would ever destroy your fame. Fight to keep it. Now, be strong and brave, my noble king, protecting life and fame together. My sword will fight at your side." The dragon heard him, the man-hating monster, and was angry. Shining with surging flames, it came for him, anxious to return his visit. Waves of fire swept at his shield, and the edge began to burn. His mail shirt could not help him. But before his hands dropped the blazing wood, Wiglaf jumped behind Beowulf's shield. His own was burned to ashes. Then the famous old hero, remembering days of glory, lifted what was left of Nagling, his ancient sword, and swung it with all his strength, smashing the grey blade into the beast's head. But then Nagling broke to pieces, as iron always had in Beowulf's hands. His arms were too strong. The hardest blade could not help him. The most wonderfully worked. He carried them to war, but fate had decreed that the Geats' great king would be no better for any weapon. Then the monster charged again, vomiting fire wild with pain, rushed out fierce and dreadful, its fear forgotten. Watching for its chance, it drove its tusks into Beowulf's neck. He staggered. The blood came flooding forth, fell like rain.